Before we begin, please note that the information in this video is for general informational and educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional educational advice. We are not affiliated with, sponsored by, or endorsed by Commonwealth Charter Academy. All decisions regarding a child's education should be made in consultation with educational professionals, school counselors, and by conducting your own thorough research. Your kid comes home from school. You ask the classic question, "How was your day?" And you get the classic one-word answer, "Fine." But you can see it in their eyes. The spark that was there in kindergarten is starting to dim. Maybe they're bored, stuck in a one-size-fits-all classroom that moves too fast, or worse, too slow. Maybe they're dealing with social pressures, anxiety, or even bullying that makes the hallways feel like a gauntlet. You feel powerless. The system is the system, right? What choice do you really have? What if I told you there's a public school in Pennsylvania with over 22,000 students, making it one of the largest in the entire state, and yet it has no physical classrooms, no school buses, and no cafeteria? What if I told you this school is 100% tuition-free, provides your family with a free laptop and an internet subsidy, and it might just be the answer you've been desperately searching for? This isn't science fiction. This is Commonwealth Charter Academy, or CCA. And whether you're a parent at your wit's end, a curious educator, or just someone wondering what the future of education looks like, you've come to the right place. Because over the next several parts of this deep dive, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most significant and often misunderstood educational institutions in the country. We're not just scratching the surface. We are dissecting everything: the curriculum, the teachers, the technology, the funding, the controversies, and the big burning question, what about socialization? By the end of this series, you won't just know about CCA. You will understand it on a fundamental level, empowering you to decide if this revolutionary model is the right path for your family. Now, I know what you're thinking. Cyber school? Is that real school? Do kids just stare at a screen all day in their pajamas? Do they ever see other human beings? How do they make friends, go to prom, or play sports? These are the exact questions we need to be asking. The skepticism is valid because for 100 years, we've been conditioned to believe that learning can only happen inside a brick-and-mortar building, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. But the world is changing, and education is being forced to change with it. CCA is at the absolute forefront of that change. So to truly understand what CCA is, we first have to answer a more basic question. What even is a charter school? The name gets thrown around a lot, often with a cloud of confusion or political baggage. Let's clear that up right now. In the United States, a charter school is a public school. Let me repeat that because it's the most important piece of the puzzle. It is a public school. This means it's funded by taxpayers, your tax dollars, and it is always tuition-free for families to attend. The key difference is in the name. Charter. These schools operate under a contract or a charter with a state or local education agency. This charter gives them more autonomy and flexibility than traditional public schools. They can innovate with their curriculum, their teaching methods, and their school day structure. In exchange for that freedom, they are held to very high standards of accountability. If they don't produce results, if their students aren't learning and succeeding, their charter can be revoked and the school can be shut down. It's a high-stakes model built on the idea of choice, innovation, and performance. Now, take that concept and add the power of the internet. That's how you get a cyber charter school. Instead of students coming to a central building, the school comes to them, delivered through technology right into their homes. This isn't just about moving worksheets online. It's about reimagining the entire educational delivery system. Commonwealth Charter Academy was founded on this very principle. It wasn't born in a corporate boardroom as a get-rich-quick scheme. It was founded in 2003 by a group of educators and parents who saw a critical need. They saw students who were falling through the cracks of the traditional system. They saw medically fragile children who couldn't attend a physical school. They saw elite athletes and artists whose training schedules made a normal school day impossible. They saw gifted students who were bored and needed to accelerate, and students with learning disabilities who needed to slow down and receive more one-on-one attention. The vision was simple yet profound: to create a customized, flexible, and safe learning environment that could meet the unique needs of every single child, regardless of their zip code, their abilities, or their circumstances. What started as a small, ambitious idea has since exploded into an educational behemoth. We're not talking about a handful of kids in a pilot program. As of today, CCA serves over 22,000 students across all 67 counties of Pennsylvania, from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Its student body is larger than 97% of all traditional school districts in the state. Think about that. More students attend CCA than live in entire towns like Hershey or Gettysburg. This isn't a niche alternative anymore. It's a mainstream educational force, and it operates on a massive scale. CCA employs over 1,000 Pennsylvania certified teachers and staff. Its annual budget is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, all of it public money redirected from the students' home school districts. This scale is crucial because it allows them to offer a staggering array of courses, resources, and support services that many smaller, traditional schools simply can't afford. We're talking about hundreds of courses, including dozens of advanced placement, honors, and career-focused technical classes. They offer everything from AP Calculus and Marine Biology to Introduction to Engineering and Digital Marketing. But the core of the CCA model, the promise that attracts tens of thousands of families, is personalization. The idea that education shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all assembly line, but a tailored experience. They call it customized learning. The school works with each family to create a personalized learning plan for their child. This plan takes into account the student's strengths, weaknesses, interests, and goals. A student who excels in math might be working a grade level ahead, while also getting extra support in writing. A high schooler passionate about graphic design can load up on career-focused electives in that field, building a real portfolio before they even graduate. This is the central pillar of CCA's philosophy, that when you tailor the education to the child, instead of forcing the child to fit the education, amazing things can happen. So we have a tuition-free, publicly funded K-12 school that operates online, serves a massive student body, and promises a completely personalized education for every child. Sounds incredible. Sounds to some almost too good to be true. And that's the central tension we're going to explore. How does this actually work in practice? What does a real day look like for a CCA student and their family? Is it a chaotic free-for-all or a highly structured, supportive environment? The reality is far more complex and fascinating than you might imagine. And that's exactly where we're going next. So what does that day actually look like? The first thing you need to understand is that there is no single CCA day. And that's not a cop-out, it's the entire point. The biggest myth is that it's either a rigid, bell-to-bell schedule mirroring a brick-and-mortar school, or it's a complete Wild West of unstructured learning. The truth is, it's a spectrum, and each family gets to decide where on that spectrum they want to live. Let's start with the structured path. Picture a 10th grader, let's call her Ava. Her alarm goes off at 7:30 a.m. She has breakfast, gets dressed, not in a uniform but in whatever makes her comfortable for a day of learning, and by 8:15 she's at her desk. This isn't just the kitchen table. It's a dedicated learning space her family has set up, with the laptop, monitor, and printer CCA provided. At 8:30 sharp, the virtual school bell rings with the click of a mouse. She logs into EDO, CCA's custom-built learning management system. Her dashboard immediately shows her schedule. First up, American history. She clicks the link and enters the virtual classroom. This isn't a pre-recorded video. It's a live lesson. She sees her teacher, Mr. Harrison, on camera, welcoming the students. On the side, a chat box is already buzzing with classmates saying good morning. Ava sees the names of kids she knows from other classes and virtual clubs. Mr. Harrison starts the lesson, sharing his screen to show a presentation on the Gilded Age. He's not just talking at them, he's asking questions. A poll pops up on Ava's screen. Which industrialist had the biggest long-term impact on America? She clicks Carnegie. The results appear in real time. Later, Mr. Harrison places them into virtual breakout rooms, small groups of 4 or 5 students, to discuss a political cartoon from the era. Ava and her group talk through the symbolism, formulate an answer, and their designated spokesperson presents it to the whole class when they reconvene. The class lasts for 50 minutes. At 9:20 it ends. She has a 10-minute break before her next live class. Algebra 2 begins at 9:30. This continues throughout the morning. Live class, short break, live class. It's structured, it's teacher-led, it's interactive, and it's paced. For a student like Ava who thrives on routine and direct interaction, this synchronous schedule is her entire school day. But now let's pivot to a completely different student. Let's call him Leo, a 7th grader. Leo is a competitive swimmer. His mornings are spent at the pool for intense 2-hour practices. A traditional school schedule would be impossible. For Leo, the day is flipped. He gets home from practice around 10 a.m., has a second breakfast, and then he logs into his CCA dashboard. His schedule looks different from Ava's. Instead of a list of live classes to join, he sees a list of assignments and recorded lessons for the day. He starts with science. The lesson is a recording of the same live class his peers took earlier that morning. He clicks play. The beauty here is that Leo is in control. When the teacher explains cellular mitosis, a concept he finds tricky, he hits pause. He rewinds the last 30 seconds and watches it again. He opens his digital textbook to cross-reference the diagram. No raising his hand and feeling embarrassed to ask the teacher to repeat something. He can do it a dozen times if he needs to. He completes the interactive quiz embedded in the video, and then moves on to the assigned reading. He might work on science for 90 minutes straight, getting into a deep flow state before taking a longer break and then tackling English. This is the asynchronous path. It's for the family that needs flexibility, for the student who is a self-starter, for the child actor, the traveling athlete, or simply the kid who works better in the afternoon. It's not chaos, it's customized control. Now you're probably thinking, this all sounds great, but where do the parents fit in? This is maybe the most misunderstood part of cyberschooling. In the CCA model, the parent or designated guardian is called the learning coach. And let's be crystal clear about what this role is and what it is not. The learning coach is not the teacher. You are not expected to know 7th grade biology or be a master of trigonometry. CCA state-certified teachers handle all the instruction, the curriculum planning, and the grading. So what does a learning coach do? They are the co-pilot. They are the on-site manager of the learning environment. For a younger student, say a first grader, the learning coach is very hands-on. They're helping little fingers log into the system, making sure they're looking at the screen during a live reading session, helping them find the right page in their workbook, and submitting a photo of their completed art project. They are the bridge between the teacher's digital instruction and the child's physical world. They ensure the day has a rhythm, that breaks are taken, and that the student stays on task. As the student gets older, the learning coach role evolves dramatically. For our 10th grader Ava, her mom isn't sitting next to her all day. She's likely working from home herself or managing the household. But she's still the coach. She might check in at lunchtime to see how the morning went. She has her own login to the EDO system, a parent portal, where she can see Ava's grades in real time, check if any assignments are overdue, and read communications from teachers. If she sees Ava's grade in Algebra 2 dipping, she can initiate a conversation. Not by trying to teach the math herself, but by asking, "Hey, I saw your last quiz score was a little low. Do you understand the material? Should we schedule a one-on-one session with your teacher during her office hours?" She's the mentor, the accountability partner, the chief motivator. She's managing the student, not the subject matter. This structure is designed to foster independence. The goal is for the student to gradually take more and more ownership of their education. By the time they're a junior or senior, the learning coach is almost like a college advisor, guiding and supporting from a distance while the student navigates their own schedule, deadlines, and communication with their teachers. But this all happens on a screen, right? It's just a digital world. That's another massive misconception. Shortly after enrolling, massive boxes arrive at a CCA family's doorstep. Unpacking them is an event. Out come the brand new textbooks, workbooks for every subject, and novels for English class. But it doesn't stop there. For science class, a box full of lab materials, beakers, slides, a microscope, dissection kits for older students. For art class, sketch pads, paints, charcoal, and clay. For younger kids, it's a treasure trove of hands-on manipulatives for math, building blocks, and craft supplies. This isn't just about replacing a classroom. It's about bringing the resources of a fully stocked school directly into the home. So a day in the life isn't just about logging in and out of virtual classes. It's also about reading a physical chapter in a history textbook, highlighting key passages. It's about clearing the kitchen table to conduct a chemistry experiment, carefully measuring liquids and recording observations. It's about sitting on the living room floor and building a model of a medieval castle for a social studies project. The screen is the portal to the teacher and the curriculum, but the learning itself is a blend of digital and tactile experiences. It's this combination that prevents the dreaded Zoom fatigue and keeps students engaged in a multi-sensory way. The day is a constant dance between structure and freedom, between online interaction and offline, hands-on work. It's a system built on the premise that no two children learn in exactly the same way, and no two families have the exact same needs. So whether you're Ava, thriving on live instruction, or Leo, mastering your schedule around your passions, The framework is designed to bend around you, not the other way around. But this all hinges on one critical element: the teachers. Who are these people on the other side of the screen? Are they just tech support reading from a script? Or are they real, dedicated educators building genuine connections with students they may never meet face-to-face? How does a teacher build a relationship, manage a classroom, and inspire a love of learning through a webcam and a chat box? The quality and character of the CCA teaching staff is the engine that makes this entire model run, or fail. And that's the piece of the puzzle we need to examine next. To understand the teachers at Commonwealth Charter Academy, you first have to throw out every image you have of a traditional classroom. Forget the apple on the desk, the squeak of chalk on a blackboard, the rows of students with their hands raised. The CCA classroom is a command center. The teacher isn't just a lecturer. They are a digital conductor, an educational air traffic controller, and a personal academic coach, all at once. The most common misconception is that these are teachers who couldn't cut it in a brick-and-mortar school. The reality is the exact opposite. Every single teacher at CCA is Pennsylvania certified, holding the same qualifications and state clearances as any public school teacher in the Commonwealth. Many come to CCA with years, even decades, of experience in traditional classrooms. They aren't escaping teaching. They are running towards a different way of doing it. They are educators who saw the limitations of a one-size-fits-all system and believed technology could offer a more personalized path. So how do they do it? Let's step into a typical live virtual lesson, what they call a live lesson. The teacher appears on screen, not in a static, boring lecture, but as the host of an interactive experience. On their multiple monitors, they see their students' names in a list. They see a live chat box buzzing with questions and comments. They can launch an instant poll to check for understanding, getting real-time data from every single student in seconds, something that's impossible in a physical room of 30 kids. They can use an interactive whiteboard, where both they and the students can write, draw, and solve problems together. They can split the entire class into smaller virtual breakout rooms for group projects, popping in and out of each room to facilitate discussion, just as they would walk from table to table in a physical classroom. The chat box, which might seem like a distraction, becomes a powerful tool. The shy student who would never dare raise their hand in front of their peers can now type a question privately to the teacher. The student who gets the concept quickly can help answer a classmate's question in the main chat, reinforcing their own learning. The teacher is constantly monitoring these multiple streams of communication, guiding the lesson, re-explaining concepts, and keeping everyone on track. It is an act of intense, sustained focus. But the live lesson is just the tip of the iceberg. That's the most visible part of their job, but it's far from the whole story. A CCA teacher's work extends far beyond the scheduled class time. This is where the model truly distinguishes itself. After a lesson, a teacher analyzes the data. They can see who answered the poll questions incorrectly, who struggled with the in-class assignment, and who didn't log in at all. They aren't just guessing who's falling behind. The system shows them. This data triggers the next phase of their work. They might schedule a one-on-one tutoring session with a struggling student later that day. They might send a modified assignment to a student who is ready to be challenged with more advanced material. And most critically, they communicate directly with the student's learning coach. This is a term you have to understand CCA. The learning coach is almost always a parent or guardian, the adult at home who serves as the on-the-ground support for the student. The CCA teacher's job is not just to teach the child, but to empower the learning coach. They form a partnership. A teacher will call or email a parent not just when there's a problem, but to strategize. They'll say, "I noticed Sarah's having trouble with fractions. Here's a video I made that explains it differently, and here's a hands-on activity you can do with her in the kitchen using measuring cups. Let's touch base again on Thursday and see how it's going." This creates a triangle of support: teacher, student, and learning coach, all connected by constant communication. It's a level of parental involvement in teacher-parent collaboration that is exceedingly rare in most traditional school systems, where a parent might only hear from a teacher at a once-a-semester conference or when a problem arises. At CCA, that communication is the daily lifeblood of the educational process. So why would a teacher choose this? Why trade the familiar structure of a school building for this complex, high-tech, and demanding role? For many, the motivation is seeing the results of true personalization. In a traditional classroom, a teacher is forced to teach to the middle. The advanced kids get bored and the kids who are behind get lost. It's an unfortunate but unavoidable reality of managing a large, diverse group. In the CCA model, teachers feel they can finally break free from that constraint. The technology allows them to meet each student exactly where they are. They find immense professional satisfaction in helping the student who was relentlessly bullied and can now learn in a safe environment, or the student with a chronic illness who no longer has to miss weeks of school, or the gifted athlete who needs a flexible schedule to train. They are reaching the students who were falling through the cracks of the traditional system. Of course, it's not a perfect utopia. The challenges for teachers are immense. The line between work and home can become incredibly blurred. When your classroom is in your house and parents can email you at 9 o'clock at night, it takes incredible discipline to switch off. Building a genuine, personal connection with a student through a screen is also profoundly difficult. It requires a different set of skills, an ability to read tone in a chat message, to notice the quiet student who never turns on their camera, and to find creative ways to build a sense of community among students who have never met in person. They also face a constant battle for legitimacy. They endure skepticism from friends, family, and former colleagues who don't believe what they're doing is real teaching. They have to become experts not only in their subject matter and in pedagogy, but also in technology, troubleshooting a student's microphone issue 1 minute and navigating a complex software update the next. The teachers who thrive at CCA are a special breed. They are technologically adept, exceptionally organized, and deeply empathetic. They are master communicators who are just as comfortable explaining a concept to a third grader as they are coaching a grandparent on how to upload a homework assignment. They are driven by a belief that education should adapt to the child, not the other way around. They are the human element that makes the whole system work, the dedicated professionals translating digital ones and zeros into genuine learning and growth. They are the engine. But an engine, no matter how powerful, is only as good as the vehicle it's in. We've seen the teachers, we've seen their virtual classroom. But what is it like to be a student in that classroom? What does a typical day look like for a 5th grader or a high school junior at CCA? Forget the theory and the teacher's perspective for a moment. The true test of any school is the daily experience of the children it serves. And that journey from the morning login to the final logout is where we're going next. For a 10th grader we'll call Ethan, that journey begins not with the blare of an alarm clock and a frantic rush for the bus, but with the quiet hum of a laptop. It's 8:15 a.m. In his old brick-and-mortar school, he'd be navigating a crowded hallway, an anonymous face in a sea of 1,000 others. Here, in his family's sunlit kitchen, he's logging into his personalized dashboard. He's a competitive swimmer, and his mornings are spent in the pool, chasing hundredths of a second. A traditional school schedule was a nightmare of missed classes and frantic catch-up. Now, his school day bends to the rhythm of his life, not the other way around. His dashboard, the CCA platform known as EDO, isn't just a list of classes. It's his command center. On the left, his schedule for the day is clearly laid out. A live lesson in American history at 10 a.m., an assignment for physics due by midnight, a reminder about a virtual club meeting for student government in the afternoon. He sees a message from his history teacher with a link to an optional documentary about the Gilded Age, something he'd asked about yesterday. This isn't a generic, one-size-fits-all education. It's a conversation. Ethan grabs a protein bar, opens his physics module, and gets to work. He has almost 2 hours of focused, uninterrupted time before his first live class. No bells, no hallway distractions. Just him, the material, and the quiet pursuit of his goals, both academic and athletic. Now let's travel 50 miles west to meet a 7th grader we'll call Sophia. Sophia's journey is different. In her previous school, she was drowning. The fast pace of the classroom, the fear of raising her hand and being wrong, it all created a perfect storm of anxiety. She was falling further and further behind in math, a subject that once came easily to her. For Sophia, the morning login at 8:45 a.m. is a moment of relief. Her dashboard looks similar to Ethan's, but her path through the day is tailored to her specific needs. Her first task is to review a recorded version of yesterday's pre-algebra lesson on linear equations. She can pause the teacher, rewind the explanation of a tricky formula, and watch it as many times as she needs until the concept clicks. There's no embarrassment, no feeling of holding the class back. At 9:30 a.m. she joins her live math class. It's a small group, and the teacher starts by asking if anyone has questions about the previous lesson. Sophia, feeling more confident after her review, types a question into the chat box. The teacher sees it immediately and addresses it, drawing out the problem on a virtual whiteboard for everyone to see. Later, in a virtual breakout room, Sophia works with 2 other students to solve a problem set. They talk through the steps, share their screens, and figure it out together. For the first time in years, Sophia isn't just surviving math class. She's participating. She's learning. The perception of cyberschool is often one of isolation, a student alone in a room staring at a screen. But for many, the reality is the opposite. It's the removal of the wrong kind of social pressure that allows for the right kind of academic engagement to flourish. Let's shift our focus again. This time to a high school senior named Maria. Maria is an artist. Her passion is digital illustration and graphic design. For her, a traditional high school felt restrictive, a place where her creative pursuits were relegated to a single 45-minute elective, if she was lucky. Her CCA experience is a world apart. Her morning is a blend of core academic requirements and a deep dive into her passions. After a live lesson in AP English Literature, where a lively debate about symbolism in The Great Gatsby unfolds in the chat, and through student microphones, Maria's day truly begins. She navigates to her Career Pathways course in visual arts. This isn't just a simple art class. She's learning the Adobe Creative Suite, building a professional portfolio, and even earning industry-recognized certifications before she ever sets foot on a college campus. Her teacher isn't just a certified art instructor. She's a professional graphic designer who provides real-world feedback on Maria's work. Today, Maria is working on a branding project for a fictional company. She spends 2 hours immersed in her work, experimenting with fonts and color palettes, completely losing track of time. This is what CCA calls passion-driven learning. It's the idea that when students are allowed to connect their education to their genuine interests, the motivation isn't about grades anymore. It's about creation. It's about building a future. By lunchtime, our 3 students have had vastly different, yet equally productive mornings. Ethan, the swimmer, is finishing his history lesson, having already put in an Olympic-level workout. Sophia, the 7th grader, has conquered a math concept that intimidated her for weeks, and is now feeling a surge of academic confidence. And Maria, the artist, has added another professional-grade piece to her portfolio, her screen a vibrant canvas of her own design. Their afternoons will be just as varied. Ethan might take a field trip by watching a live-stream tour of the National Constitution Center, something arranged by his social studies teacher. Sophia has a scheduled one-on-one video call with her English teacher to get extra help on an upcoming essay, a level of personal attention she could only dream of in a class of 35. Maria will be leading a meeting of the Digital Art Club, collaborating with other student artists from across the state on a new online gallery they're curating. This is the fundamental promise of a school like CCA: to deconstruct the rigid, industrialized model of education and rebuild it around the individual. The technology, the dashboard, the live lessons, the chat functions isn't the product. It's the tool. It's the scaffold that allows 1,000 different educational blueprints to be built upon the same foundation. The platform provides the structure, but the students, in partnership with their teachers and families, are the architects of their own education. The day doesn't end with a bell. It ends when the work is done, when the goals for that day are met. For Ethan, it might be logging off at 3 p.m. to head to the gym for his afternoon practice. For Sophia, it might be finishing her last assignment at 4:30 p.m., feeling proud and stress-free. For Maria, it might be working late into the evening on her art project, not because she has to, but because she is genuinely inspired and in a state of creative flow. This flexibility is perhaps the most celebrated and most misunderstood aspect of cyber charter education. It isn't an excuse to do less. It's an opportunity to do more. It's the freedom to align your learning with your life, your passions, and your unique needs. But this freedom comes with a tremendous responsibility, one that falls not just on the student, but on the entire support system around them. Because for every Ethan, Sophia, and Maria who thrives in this environment, there are legitimate questions about those who might not. What happens when a student isn't a self-starter? What about the critical role of parents? And how does the school ensure that flexibility doesn't become a free-fall? That is the other side of the coin, and it's where we must look next. The entire model of a school like Commonwealth Charter Academy hinges on one single, non-negotiable element. It's not the technology, not the curriculum, and not even the teachers, as important as they are. It's the person sitting on the other side of the screen with the student, especially in the younger grades. CCA calls this person the learning coach, and in 99% of cases, that's a parent. This is the answer to the question: What happens when a student isn't a self-starter? The answer is the learning coach steps in. This role is so fundamental, so absolutely critical, that if you're considering a cyber charter school, understanding this job is more important than anything else. It is not a passive role. It's not just about making sure the internet is working and that your child has a snack. The learning coach is the co-pilot, the on-site manager, the motivator, the scheduler, and the first line of technical support. In elementary school, the commitment is immense. A learning coach is essentially a home-based teacher's aide. They are responsible for making sure their first grader logs into the correct live class on time, helps them navigate the online platform to find their assignments, and sits with them to ensure they understand the material and complete the work. You can't just set up a 7-year-old in front of a laptop at 8:30 in the morning and go to your home office to work, then check in at 3 o'clock. Simply does not work. The school is very clear about this during the enrollment process. They stress that for grades K through 5, the learning coach should expect to dedicate several hours each day, side by side with their child. As students get older, the role evolves. For a middle schooler, the learning coach might transition from co-pilot to air traffic controller. They're not necessarily sitting next to their student for every lesson, but they are constantly monitoring. They're checking the online gradebook daily, making sure assignments are being submitted, and helping their child manage the increased workload and multiple teachers. They're the ones who help the student break down a big project into smaller steps, or help them email a teacher to ask for clarification. The independence is growing, but the oversight is still crucial. By high school, the goal is for the student to be the pilot of their own education. The learning coach becomes more of a mentor or an academic advisor. The student is expected to manage their own schedule, communicate with their teachers directly, and advocate for themselves. But even then, the parent is still the safety net. They still have access to the gradebook, they still get communications from the school, and they are still ultimately responsible for ensuring their teenager is meeting the requirements to graduate. So, when we talk about that double-edged sort of flexibility, this is the other side. The freedom for a student to work at their own pace is directly tied to the responsibility of the parent to ensure that pace leads to the finish line. If a family has two parents working full-time jobs that are inflexible, or a single parent working multiple jobs, this model presents a monumental challenge. It's not impossible, but it requires a level of planning, sacrifice, and logistical coordination that is far beyond what's required for a traditional brick-and-mortar school. It's not homeschooling, where the parent chooses the curriculum and does all the teaching, but it's not a hands-off, drop-them-at-the-door experience either. It's a partnership, and the parent is the most active partner in the equation. But what if the partnership isn't enough? What if, despite a dedicated learning coach, a student still struggles with motivation? What if the flexibility becomes a free-fall? This is where the school's own safety nets are supposed to catch them. CCA doesn't just throw a laptop at a family and hope for the best. They have a structured system of monitoring and intervention. First, let's talk about attendance. It's a common misconception that cyber school students can just roll out of bed whenever they want. Pennsylvania state law requires students to complete a certain number of instructional hours per year, 900 for elementary and 990 for secondary. CCA tracks this meticulously. It's not just about logging in. The system tracks time spent in live classes, time spent working on assignments, and the actual submission of that work. If a student isn't logging in or completing work, they are marked absent. This isn't an honor system. It's a data-driven process. Think of the homeroom teacher as a sort of digital truancy officer, but with a focus on support. Every student is assigned a homeroom teacher or school counselor, who is their primary point of contact. These teachers are constantly monitoring their students' progress. They're watching for missed assignments, dipping grades, and a lack of participation in live lessons. When a red flag appears, the first step is outreach. An email, a phone call to the learning coach. Hey, I noticed Johnny missed his last 2 math assignments. Is everything okay? How can I help? If the problem persists, the interventions escalate. This could mean a required virtual conference with the student, the learning coach, and the teacher. They might work together to create a new schedule, identify specific areas where the student is struggling, and set up a formal academic improvement plan. This plan will have concrete, measurable goals and regular check-ins. The goal is always to get the student back on track, not to be punitive. But the accountability is real. If a student continues to be truant, meaning they are not logging hours or completing work, the school is legally obligated to follow the same truancy laws as any public school in the state, which can eventually lead to involvement with county children and youth services. It's a serious business. This structure is designed to combat the biggest risk of online learning: isolation and invisibility. In a classroom of 30 kids, a quiet student who is falling behind can sometimes go unnoticed for weeks. In CCA's model, the data doesn't lie. A missed assignment is an immediate, visible data point that a teacher can act on. However, this addresses the academic freefall. What about the social one? This is an equally valid, and perhaps more complex, concern. The very nature of learning from home means a student is not getting the constant, unstructured social interaction of a traditional school. They aren't navigating crowded hallways, eating in a bustling cafeteria, or having spontaneous conversations between classes. That organic social development is missing. CCA attempts to fill this gap in several ways. We've mentioned the field trips, which are the cornerstone of their in-person social offerings. But on a day-to-day basis, they rely on virtual tools. There are dozens of online clubs for every interest imaginable, from gaming and coding to art, debate, and student government. These clubs meet in virtual classrooms, allowing students to connect with peers who share their passions from all across the state. There are virtual school spirit weeks, online talent shows, and even a virtual prom. But let's be honest, a virtual club is not the same as sitting with your friends at a lunch table. It requires a different kind of social skill to build relationships through a screen. And it puts the onus back on the student and their family to be proactive. The most successful CCA families are often the ones who are deeply integrated into their local communities. Their kids are in local sports leagues, take music lessons, volunteer, or are active in church or community groups. They use the flexibility of cyberschool to build a rich, diverse social life outside of the classroom. They see school as the academic component of their child's life, and they actively build the social component themselves. For a student who is already shy or struggles with social anxiety, this can be either a blessing or a curse. For some, the pressure of a traditional school environment is crushing, and learning from the safety of home allows them to come out of their shell academically. They might find it easier to type a question in a chat box than to raise their hand in a crowded room. But for others, the lack of forced daily interaction can lead to deeper isolation. Again, it comes back to that partnership. The school provides the tools, the clubs, the events, but the learning coach and the student have to be the ones to use them and to build a social life beyond them. There is no magic wand. The flexibility is a tool, and its outcome, for better or for worse, depends entirely on how the family decides to use it. So, if the flexibility is the framework, what's actually being taught inside of it? What does a school day at Commonwealth Charter Academy look like? This is where we move from the philosophy of cyberschool to the nuts and bolts of the education itself. And the first thing you need to understand is that CCA isn't just logging onto a Zoom call for 6 hours a day. The academic structure is a blend, a hybrid model designed to leverage the best of both worlds: live, interactive instruction and self-paced, independent learning. They call these two modes synchronous and asynchronous. Those are just fancy words, but understanding them is the key to understanding the entire CCA experience. Let's start with the synchronous part, the live classes. These are the scheduled, real-time sessions where a student logs into a virtual classroom with their teacher and their classmates. Now, if you're picturing a grainy webcam feed of a teacher droning on while 30 black boxes with names on them sit in silence, you need to update that mental image. The platform they use is designed for interaction. Teachers use digital whiteboards, they run instant polls to check for understanding, and they use a chat box that is often buzzing with questions and comments. Students can raise their hand digitally to ask to be unmuted to speak. More importantly, they use breakout rooms. A teacher might pose a complex problem, then digitally split the class into small groups of 3 or 4 students to solve it together in a private virtual space, before bringing everyone back to the main room to share their findings. It's a deliberate attempt to replicate, and in some ways, improve upon the collaborative environment of a physical classroom. There's no back of the room to hide in. A teacher can see exactly who is participating in a poll, who is answering questions in the chat, and can directly engage a student who seems to be quiet. For some kids, this is actually less intimidating than raising their hand in a room full of people. Typing a question can feel safer than speaking it. These live lessons are the backbone of the weekly schedule. They provide the structure, the direct instruction from a certified teacher, and that crucial real-time connection with peers. But that's only half the story. The other half, the asynchronous part, is where the much-touted flexibility really comes to life. This is the work students do on their own time. CCA uses a proprietary learning management system called EDO. Think of it as a digital textbook, a planner, a gradebook, and a resource library all rolled into one. For each course, the entire curriculum is laid out. A student might log in on a Tuesday morning and see their assignments for the day. For math, it might be to watch a pre-recorded video explaining a new concept, followed by an interactive quiz that gives them immediate feedback. If they get a question wrong, the system might suggest they rewatch a specific part of the video or review a particular concept page. For English, it might involve reading a chapter of a digital novel, highlighting key passages, and then contributing to a class discussion forum, where they post their thoughts and respond to the posts of 2 other classmates. For science, they might conduct a virtual lab simulation, mixing digital chemicals to see the reactions without any of the safety risks or need for expensive equipment. This asynchronous work is the reason a family can decide to go to a museum on a Wednesday morning. As long as the student completes their assigned work by the deadline, usually the end of the week, they have immense control over their schedule. This is a game changer, but it's also the system's greatest challenge. It places a tremendous amount of responsibility on the student and their learning coach. The temptation to procrastinate is real. The need for self-discipline is non-negotiable. The EDO system lays out the path, but the student has to walk it. This dual system also allows for incredible academic personalization. Let's imagine 2 different 5th graders in the same math class. The first student is a math whiz. She attends the live lesson on fractions, grasps the concept instantly, and then flies through her asynchronous assignments in 20 minutes. Because she's not tethered to a bell schedule, she doesn't have to sit there bored for the next 40 minutes waiting for the rest of the class. She can immediately move on to her history reading, or even work on an advanced supplemental math project. Now consider the second student. He struggles with math. The concept of fractions is confusing to him. During the live lesson, he uses the private chat feature to ask the teacher a question without feeling embarrassed. Afterwards, when he gets to the asynchronous work, he can rewatch the teacher's explanation from the recorded lesson as many times as he needs. He can take his time with the practice problems. If he's still stuck, his learning coach can see exactly where he's struggling, and they can schedule a one-on-one session with the teacher for extra help later that day. In a traditional classroom, that student might have been lost in the shuffle. At CCA, the model is built to accommodate both of these students, allowing one to accelerate and the other to get the support they need, all within the same course. The role of the teacher is also fundamentally different. They aren't just lecturers. A significant portion of their job happens outside the live lesson. They are constantly monitoring student progress in the EDO system. They're grading assignments and providing detailed, personalized feedback, not just the letter grade, but specific comments on what the student did well and where they need to improve. They hold virtual office hours, offer small group tutoring sessions for students struggling with the same concept, and they are in regular communication with the learning coaches. They become more like academic guides or facilitators than traditional sage-on-the-stage instructors. And the curriculum itself goes far beyond the standard core subjects. This is where CCA leverages its scale as one of the largest public schools in the state. They offer a staggering array of electives and specialized programs that most neighborhood schools could only dream of. We're talking about dozens of advanced placement or AP courses. We're talking about honors tracks for gifted students. But the real standout is their Career and Technical Education Program, or CTE. CCA has built out over 20 distinct career pathways. A student interested in healthcare can take courses in medical terminology, anatomy, and even earn a certification as a pharmacy technician while still in high school. Someone passionate about technology can dive into computer programming, cybersecurity, or game design. There are pathways for business, for skilled trades like carpentry and electrical work, for veterinary sciences, for early childhood education. These aren't just online classes. CCA has built a network of partnerships across the state. The carpentry student might spend part of their week at a local union training center, learning hands-on skills. The vet sciences student might have an internship at an animal hospital. This workforce development piece is a massive part of CCA's identity. They are actively trying to provide students not just with a diploma, but with a tangible, marketable skill or a head start on a college degree through extensive dual enrollment programs with local colleges. For a student who knows what they want to do, this can be an incredible accelerator, allowing them to graduate high school with a resume, a portfolio, and professional certifications already in hand. So you have this incredibly complex and customizable machine, live classes for interaction, self-paced work for flexibility, and a vast catalog of courses for specialization. On paper, it sounds like the future of education. The system is designed to provide opportunity, but does it deliver results? When the rubber meets the road, when students have to sit for the same state-mandated standardized tests as every other public school student, how do they actually perform? Is this model truly creating better outcomes? Or is it just a different-looking package for the same old educational challenges? The data on this is fascinating, and frankly, it's one of the most controversial aspects of the entire cyber charter debate. So let's dive right into the numbers, because this is where the arguments for and against schools like CCA get heated. When you look at the raw data published by state departments of education, the picture can seem, at first glance, pretty clear. And for critics of cyber charters, it's damning. Let's take Pennsylvania's standardized tests, the PSSAs for younger grades and the Keystone exams for high school. These tests measure proficiency. Essentially, they ask, is this student performing at grade level in math, reading, and science? Historically, if you average the scores across all cyber charter schools in the state, they consistently underperform the statewide average for traditional public schools. In some years, the gap is significant. For example, you might see a year where 45% of students in traditional schools are proficient in math, while the average for cyber charters is only 25%. Critics seize on this. They argue, quite simply, this is a failed model. They say, look, we are pouring billions of taxpayer dollars into these schools, and they are producing students who are not meeting basic academic standards. The experiment is over, and it didn't work. They point to state-level school performance profiles, which often rank cyber charters, including CCA, in the bottom tiers of academic achievement. From this perspective, the flexibility and personalization we talked about earlier mean nothing if the end result is a student who can't pass a standardized test. It's an argument rooted in accountability and results. If a school isn't meeting the benchmark, it shouldn't be a school. But this is where CCA and its supporters fire back, and their argument is just as compelling, forcing you to question what the purpose of a test score really is. They argue that looking at proficiency alone is like judging a marathon runner, based only on whether they finished in under 3 hours, without knowing if they started the race with a broken leg. CCA's core argument is that they serve a vastly different, and often more challenged, student population than the average neighborhood school. They enroll a disproportionately high number of students who were already academically behind when they arrived. These are kids who were failing in their previous school, students with severe anxiety who missed months of class, or learners with disabilities that weren't being properly addressed. So, CCA says, judging us on the percentage of students at grade level is unfair. The real question should be, are we helping these students learn and improve? This is where the concept of student growth comes in. In Pennsylvania, this is measured by something called PVAAS, the Pennsylvania Value-Added Assessment System. It's a complex statistical model, but the idea is simple. It tracks an individual student's test scores over time to predict how they should perform in the coming year. If the student meets that expectation, they've achieved a year's worth of growth. If they exceed it, they're learning at an accelerated rate. And on this metric, the story often flips completely on its head. While CCA's proficiency scores might be low, their growth scores are often at or even above the state standard. They can point to the data and say, yes, this student may have started with us in 9th grade reading at a 5th grade level. And no, they may not be at a 10th grade level by the end of the year. But they've gone from a 5th grade to an 8th grade reading level in a single year. That's 3 years of growth in one. The old system was failing them. Our system is working. This reframes the entire debate. Is the better school the one that takes A students and keeps them A students? Or the one that takes F students and turns them into C students? Both schools are doing their job, but the second one is arguably performing a much heavier lift. This same dynamic plays out with graduation rates. Critics will point out that CCA's 4-year cohort graduation rate is often lower than the state average. They'll frame this as a failure to get students across the finish line. But again, CCA counters by highlighting the students they serve. They are a destination for students at high risk of dropping out altogether. For a student who has been expelled or is dealing with a severe medical crisis, the goal isn't necessarily graduating on a rigid 4-year timeline. The goal is to graduate, period. CCA offers credit recovery programs and flexible pacing that allows a student to take 5 or even 6 years to get their diploma. So while their 4-year rate might suffer, they argue their model is actually preventing dropouts by providing a viable path to a diploma that didn't exist for these students before. But perhaps the most powerful piece of CCA's academic argument lies in what happens after graduation. The school has invested an immense amount of resources into career and technical education, or CTE. They understand that for many of their students, a four-year university isn't the goal or the best path. So they've built robust programs in fields like IT, healthcare, skilled trades, and business. They offer industry-recognized certifications that students can earn alongside their high school diploma. A student can graduate from CCA not just with a piece of paper, but with a CompTIA A+ certification that makes them immediately employable in an IT help desk role, or as a certified nursing assistant ready to enter the healthcare field. They have a huge focus on internships, apprenticeships, and real-world work experience. They measure their success not just by college acceptance letters, but by job placements, military enlistments, and enrollment in trade schools. From their perspective, they are preparing students for life, not just for a test. They argue that a student who graduates with a diploma and a well-paying job in a skilled trade is a massive success story, regardless of what their Keystone exam scores looked like 2 years earlier. So you're left with two completely different data-backed stories. One story, told by critics, is of an academically underperforming institution that fails to meet state benchmarks in proficiency and graduation. The other story, told by the school, is of an academic rescue mission that takes in struggling students and produces massive learning growth, ultimately launching them into successful careers. Both sides are using real numbers to make their case. The conflict isn't about fake data, it's about what data matters most. How do you measure the success of a school that has redefined its own mission? Is it about meeting a uniform state standard? Or is it about meeting the individual needs of a non-uniform student body? There is no easy answer, and your conclusion depends entirely on your own philosophy of what public education is supposed to achieve. But if the academic results are this complex and debated, it begs an even bigger question: where is all the money going? The answer to that question reveals the multi-billion-dollar political battle at the heart of public education in Pennsylvania, and it affects every single taxpayer in the state. To understand the controversy surrounding Commonwealth Charter Academy, you have to follow the money. And it's not a trickle. It's a torrent of taxpayer cash, flowing from every corner of the state into a single centralized organization. The system is deceptively simple. When a student leaves their local brick-and-mortar school to enroll in CCA, their home school district is legally required to write a check to CCA for that student's tuition. But this isn't like college tuition. This is a direct transfer of public education funds. The amount of that check is determined by a state formula, based on what the home district spends per student. For a regular education student, this can be anywhere from $10,000 to over $20,000 a year. For a special education student, that figure can skyrocket to $40,000, $50,000, or even $60,000 per year, per student. Now multiply that by the sheer size of CCA. With an enrollment consistently north of 20,000 students, the math becomes staggering. We're not talking about a few $1,000,000. We're talking about an annual revenue stream that has surged past $300 million. In some years, it's approached $500 million. Let that sink in. A single nonprofit, K-12 public school with an annual budget that rivals that of a major university or a large corporation. So the question isn't just if they have money. The question is, what are they doing with it all? A significant portion, of course, goes to the basics: teacher salaries, curriculum development, and the technology that forms the backbone of the school. Every student receives a laptop, a printer, and other necessary hardware. The school provides a stipend to help families cover internet costs. This is the core of their pitch: a fully equipped at-home learning environment at no direct cost to the family. They also spend millions on their family service centers across the state, and on the hands-on field trips that are a major selling point for families looking for more than just a screen-based education. But when you dig into their financial disclosures, you find expenditures that you would never see from a traditional public school. The most glaring is advertising. CCA spends millions upon millions of dollars every single year on marketing. We're talking about a sophisticated, statewide, multi-platform advertising blitz. Television commercials during prime time, radio ads, billboards dominating highways, glossy mailers, and a relentless targeted social media presence. They're not just a school, they are a brand, and they spend like one. Critics argue this is a fundamental misuse of education funds. Your local school district doesn't have a multi-million-dollar marketing department. They don't buy ads during the evening news to lure students from the neighboring town. They are tasked with educating the children who live within their boundaries. CCA, on the other hand, is in a perpetual state of recruitment. They are competing for customers, in all 500 school districts in Pennsylvania. And they are using the public's own money, funneled through the tuition system, to do it. It creates a bizarre feedback loop. The more students they attract, the more money they get, and the more money they can spend on advertising to attract even more students. Then there are the executive salaries. While public school superintendents' salaries are a frequent source of local debate, the compensation for CCA's leadership operates on a different level. CCA's founder and CEO has, in some years, received a total compensation package of over $800,000. That's more than double the salary of the governor of Pennsylvania or the U.S. Secretary of Education. Supporters say this is the market rate to attract top talent to run a complex, $250 million organization. Critics ask a more pointed question. Should a publicly funded school be paying its top executive like a corporate CEO? Especially when that money is drawn from cash-strapped school districts across the state. But the most shocking revelation from CCA's financial records isn't what they spend their money on. It's how much they don't spend. Unlike a local school district that might struggle to balance its budget year after year, CCA has amassed a colossal surplus. It's officially called an unassigned fund balance. Think of it as a savings account. In recent years, that savings account has grown to over $400 million. $400 million in cash and assets, sitting on the books of a public charter school. To put that in perspective, that amount is larger than the entire annual budget of most of the school districts in the state. CCA's defense is that this is responsible fiscal management. They claim they need a robust rainy day fund to handle unforeseen circumstances, to invest in new technologies, and to ensure the long-term stability of the school. But for school districts forced to write those tuition checks, many of whom are raising local property taxes just to keep the lights on, the sight of CCA hoarding hundreds of millions of dollars is infuriating. They see it as proof that the funding system is fundamentally broken. They argue that cyber charters don't have the same expenses as brick-and-mortar schools, no buildings to maintain, no bus fleets to run, no sports stadiums to upkeep, yet they are paid as if they do. The result, they claim, is a massive overpayment that allows CCA to pile up a fortune while their own programs are being cut. This financial imbalance has transformed the debate over school choice into an all-out political war in the state capitol. This isn't just about educational philosophy anymore. It's about money and power. CCA has become one of the most powerful lobbying forces in Harrisburg. Using that river of public funding, they, along with a coalition of other cyber charters, spend millions of dollars a year on professional lobbyists. These are insiders whose job is to walk the halls of the Capitol, meet with lawmakers, and influence legislation to protect the charter school funding formula and fight back against any new regulations or oversight. Their political influence doesn't stop with lobbying. They are also major campaign donors. Political action committees, or PACs, funded by charter school advocates and executives, donate hundreds of thousands of dollars directly to the campaign accounts of key politicians on both sides of the aisle: governors, state senators, and representatives, especially those who sit on the powerful education committees. The message is clear. Support us and we will support you. Oppose us and we will fund your opponent. This political machine was built to defend the status quo at all costs. On the other side of the battle are the traditional public school advocates, a massive coalition of school boards, superintendents, and the powerful teachers' unions. They argue they are fighting for the survival of public education itself. They claim the current system is bleeding their districts dry, forcing them to make impossible choices between cutting art and music programs, laying off teachers, or raising property taxes on local homeowners. They call the cyber charter funding formula a state-sanctioned siphon, draining vital resources away from the 97% of students who attend traditional public schools to enrich a handful of large, unaccountable institutions. This is the multi-billion-dollar conflict raging just beneath the surface of our education system. It's a clash of two fundamentally different visions for the future of public schooling. One side champions choice, innovation, and the free market, arguing that money should follow the student. The other champions community, equity, and the foundational role of the neighborhood school, arguing that public funds should be stewarded by and for the public. Caught in the middle of this political crossfire are students, parents, and every single taxpayer in the state. And while the lobbyists argue in the Capitol and the attack ads fly, the fund balance at CCA continues to grow, a testament to a system that many now believe is fundamentally, and perhaps intentionally, broken. The fight to control this river of cash has now moved from the legislature to the courtroom, sparking legal battles that could reshape the very definition of public education for generations to come. At the heart of that legal firestorm is a single explosive question. Is the way Pennsylvania funds its charter schools, specifically its cyber charter schools, legal? Is it constitutional? For years, school districts across the state have been screaming from the rooftops that it is not. They argue the system is a fundamentally broken, inequitable wealth transfer machine that is systematically gutting public schools to enrich private operators. And in 2014, a coalition of school districts, parents, and advocacy groups decided they had screamed long enough. They filed a landmark lawsuit, a legal reckoning decades in the making, aimed squarely at the heart of the state's education funding formula. This wasn't just another lawsuit. It was a declaration of war. The case, led by the William Penn School District, argued that the state legislature had failed its most basic constitutional duty to provide a thorough and efficient system of public education. The core of their argument was that the funding mechanism for charter schools was so irrational, so disconnected from actual costs, that it was actively preventing them from fulfilling that duty for the students who remained in their classrooms. To understand their argument, you have to understand the bizarre, almost unbelievable math that governs this system. When a student leaves a traditional public school to attend a cyber charter like CCA, their home school district is legally required to send a tuition payment to that charter. The problem is how that payment is calculated. The law says the district has to pay the charter a rate based on its own per pupil spending from the previous year. It sounds simple, but the implications are devastating. Imagine you're a small rural school district. You have aging buildings to maintain, buses that have to travel long distances, and a cafeteria to run. All of those costs, maintenance, transportation, food service, athletics, are baked into your per pupil spending number. Now, a student decides to enroll in CCA. They will never step foot in your building, ride your bus, or eat in your cafeteria. Yet, the check you are forced to write to CCA is based on a formula that includes all of those costs. You are, in effect, paying CCA for services it does not and will never provide. Critics call this paying for phantom costs. And it's a massive one-way flow of cash from public districts to private operators. While the district's costs barely decrease, they still have to heat the building and run the bus for the remaining students. A huge chunk of their funding vanishes. But it gets worse. The most indefensible part of the formula, the part that has driven school superintendents to the brink, is how it handles special education. The system is so convoluted it seems designed to be unfair. A district's tuition payment to a charter for a special education student is calculated based on the district's average spending for all of its special education students. This creates absurd and catastrophic outcomes. Let's say a district has 10 special education students. 9 of them have mild learning disabilities, costing the district about $15,000 each per year. But one student has profound, complex needs, requiring a full-time aide in specialized therapies, costing the district $150,000 a year. The district's average special education spending would be skewed incredibly high by that one student. Now, if one of the students with a mild learning disability, the one who costs $15,000 to educate, decides to go to CCA, the district is forced to pay CCA a tuition rate based on that wildly inflated average. The district might have to send CCA $40,000 or more to educate a student they were serving for just $15,000. It's a mandatory overpayment, written into law. For years, school districts have presented evidence showing they are forced to pay cyber charters 2, 3, or even 4 times what it actually costs to educate a child with special needs. They are hemorrhaging money, not based on the needs of children, but on a flawed, nonsensical formula. This isn't a rounding error. Across Pennsylvania, this amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars every single year being drained from traditional public schools and funneled into the coffers of cyber charters. As the lawsuit progressed, the stories from the plaintiff districts were harrowing. They described cutting art and music programs, firing librarians and laying off reading specialists, increasing class sizes to unmanageable levels. They detailed how they were forced to choose between fixing a leaky roof and buying new textbooks, all while writing bigger and bigger checks to CCA and other cyber charters, organizations with no buildings to fix, no libraries to staff, and no cafeterias to run. The defense from the state and the charter school lobbyists was predictable. They argued that money follows the child, a core tenet of the school choice movement. They claimed that districts were simply inefficient and bloated, and that charters were providing a necessary alternative that parents were actively choosing. CCA argued that it had its own significant costs, developing curriculum, providing technology, and of course its massive multi-million-dollar marketing campaigns designed to lure more students, and their attached funding away from those very same struggling districts. The state's lawyers took a different tack, arguing that school funding was a political question for the legislature to decide, not a legal one for the courts to meddle in. For 7 months, a courtroom in Harrisburg became the stage for a battle over two fundamentally different visions of education. On one side, lawyers for the school districts painted a picture of a system starved for resources, where a child's opportunity was determined by their zip code, a reality made exponentially worse by the parasitic drain of the charter funding formula. On the other side, lawyers for the state's legislative leaders defended the status quo, arguing that the system, while perhaps imperfect, was constitutional. And then, on February 7, 2023, the verdict landed like an earthquake. In a monumental, 786-page decision, Commonwealth Court Judge Renee Cohn-Jubileer sided with the school districts. She declared Pennsylvania's school funding system unconstitutional. She wrote that the disparities were not only irrational, but that they deprived students in poorer districts of their basic right to a quality education. The ruling was a stunning, historic victory for public school advocates. It was a complete validation of everything they had been fighting for decades. The decision didn't specifically single out the charter school formula, but it condemned the entire inequitable structure of which it was the most glaring and destructive part. For a moment, it felt like the war was over. It seemed that the river of cash flowing from public schools to private operators might finally be dammed. But this was not the end of the story. It was merely the end of the beginning. The powerful legislative leaders who had designed and defended the system for years immediately announced they would appeal. The case was headed for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the final arbiter. The single court decision, as momentous as it was, hadn't actually changed the law yet. It had just set the stage for the final decisive battle. And as the lawyers prepared their arguments for the highest court in the state, Commonwealth Charter Academy continued to operate, continued to advertise, and continued to cash the checks, all while the fundamental question of its existence hung in the balance. The case, officially known as A.W. and DWV Commonwealth Charter Academy Cyber Charter School, arrived at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court not as a quiet legal filing, but as a thunderclap. At its heart was a question so simple it was almost deceptive. Can a local school district, the very entity that pays a cyber charter's bills, challenge the validity of that charter if it believes it was improperly granted decades ago? For years, the answer had been a resounding no. A complex web of laws and prior court rulings had created a kind of legal fortress around charter schools. Once the Department of Education approved a charter, it was considered settled law. Local districts were told their only job was to write the checks, regardless of any doubts they had about the school's origins or oversight. The school districts argued this was fundamentally absurd. They painted a picture of a system where they were forced to be financial conduits, siphoning millions of taxpayer dollars to an institution they had no power to question. Their lawyers contended that the original charter, granted to CCA's predecessor back in 2003, was based on a flawed, perhaps even invalid, application. They argued that if the foundation was rotten, the entire structure built upon it was illegitimate. And if they, the ones footing the bill, couldn't raise that objection, then who could? It was, they claimed, a matter of basic accountability, a taxation without representation for the modern age, where local communities were being drained of resources with no legal recourse. CCA's defense was equally forceful. Their lawyers argued that the school districts were trying to relitigate a settled issue from 20 years ago. They claimed that allowing this challenge would open a Pandora's box of legal chaos. Every charter school in the state could suddenly find itself under attack, forced to defend decisions made by different people, under different laws decades in the past. It would create, in their words, unrelenting and costly litigation that would destabilize the entire educational landscape. They positioned CCA not as a financial drain, but as a vital educational provider that had served hundreds of thousands of students. They had followed the rules as they existed. To change those rules retroactively, they argued, would be unfair and destructive, punishing a successful school and its students for the sake of a bureaucratic turf war. The justices of the Supreme Court listened. The future of public education funding in Pennsylvania hung on their interpretation of the law. And then, on August 22, 2023, the decision came down. In a landmark 4-3 ruling, the court sided with the school districts. The legal fortress that had protected CCA for 2 decades was breached. The majority opinion, written by Justice Christine Donahue, was a direct shot at the old way of thinking. She wrote that preventing school districts from challenging a charter's validity leads to an absurd and unreasonable result. The court essentially said that it makes no sense to force a district to pay for something it believes is legally invalid, without at least giving it a chance to make that argument in court. The ruling didn't shut down CCA. It didn't invalidate its charter. But it did something arguably more significant. It gave the school districts the key. It unlocked the courthouse doors and said, "You now have the right to challenge this." The fallout was immediate. School district advocates hailed it as a monumental victory for taxpayers and local control. For the first time, they had a weapon to fight back against what they saw as a flawed and financially draining system. CCA, for its part, put on a brave face, stating that the ruling was merely procedural and that they were confident their charter would be upheld when challenged on its merits. But behind the scenes, the landscape had fundamentally shifted. The era of untouchability was over. Every invoice CCA sent out would now carry with it the implicit threat of a legal battle. And this brings us to the heart of the matter. The story of Commonwealth Charter Academy was never just about one school. It's a microcosm of a titanic struggle playing out in every state across America. It's the story of the battle for the future of public education itself. On one side, you have the traditional public school system, an institution that has been the bedrock of American communities for over a century. It's a system built on the idea of a shared, local public investment in the next generation. But it's also a system criticized for being bureaucratic, slow to adapt, and in many areas, failing to provide the quality education students deserve. On the other side, you have the school choice movement, championed by organizations like CCA. This movement is built on the ideals of innovation, competition, and parental empowerment. It argues that money should follow the student, and that families, not zip codes, should determine where their child is educated. They see cybercharters and other alternatives as the free market's answer to a failing government monopoly. But this movement is also criticized for siphoning money from already underfunded public schools, for a lack of transparency and accountability, and for replacing the public trust with a corporate, profit-driven model. CCA sits directly on this fault line. To its supporters, it is the embodiment of progress. It's a lifeline for students who don't thrive in a traditional setting, for those who are bullied, have special health needs, or are elite athletes and artists needing a flexible schedule. It represents the freedom to choose, a fundamental American value. To its detractors, it is a symptom of a deep sickness in the system. It's a taxpayer-funded behemoth that has mastered marketing and lobbying, growing its enrollment and revenue while facing little of the oversight and accountability demanded of its brick-and-mortar counterparts. They see a system where public money is privatized, weakening the community's shared investment in its local schools. The COVID-19 pandemic threw gasoline on this fire. Suddenly, every family in America got a crash course in online learning. For some, it was a disaster that highlighted the irreplaceable value of in-person instruction and social interaction. For others, it was a revelation. They saw the potential of a more flexible, personalized education, and enrollments at schools like CCA skyrocketed. The pandemic didn't create the debate over online education, but it forced it into the mainstream. It made us all ask, what is a school? Is it a building, a community, or is it simply a service to be delivered? And that is the ultimate question CCA forces us to confront. Because when you strip away the legal arguments, the financial reports, and the political rhetoric, you are left with a simple, profound choice. Is education a public good? A shared responsibility that we all invest in for the betterment of society as a whole? In this model, schools are more than just places of learning. They are community hubs, centers of social development, and the great equalizers in a democratic society. The goal is to lift everyone up together. Or is education a private commodity, a service to be consumed by individual families based on their personal needs and preferences? In this model, competition and choice are the driving forces. The market, in theory, rewards the best providers and weeds out the worst, leading to better outcomes for all. The truth is, Commonwealth Charter Academy is both a symptom and a cause. It exists because the traditional system has failed many students, but its very existence and the vast sums of public money it consumes arguably makes it harder for that traditional system to improve. It is a solution that, for some, perpetuates the problem. The Supreme Court's decision wasn't an end to this story. It was the start of a new, more contentious chapter. The battle will now move from the High Court back to the local level, where individual districts, armed with this new legal precedent, will have to decide if they want to take on the giant. The story of Commonwealth Charter Academy, therefore, is not finished. It is being written right now in school board meetings, in courtrooms, and in the homes of hundreds of thousands of families across Pennsylvania and the nation. It's a story with no easy villains and no perfect heroes. There are only difficult questions and a series of imperfect answers. And it's a story that forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves a fundamental question about the kind of society we want to build. What do we truly owe to our children, and who do we trust to deliver it? The final answer will define not just the future of one school, but the future of public education for generations to come.